Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the October 4th, 2024 Charter, or I'm sorry, CASI quarterly training, which is on preparing your board for charter renewals. Next slide, please. Next slide. So a little different from normal, we have inserted a slide here that shows you where you can access the documents and handouts for today. And someone is going to drop that in this chat so that you can access it. And I want to point out that many of the slides have links to resources that you can use. Next slide, please. And just as a reminder, CASI is a collaboration among the California Department of Education, the California Charter Authorizing Professionals, and the Santa Clara County Office of Education. I'm Mifa Fairley, Executive Director at the Charter Schools Department in Santa Clara County, and today you will hear from Michelle Johnson, who is also with SCCOE. You'll also hear from CCAP, from Tom Hutton and Dave Patterson, and from Craig Heimbigner. I think I said that right, from CDE, in addition to some of our other authorizers in the state. Next slide. Next slide. So just want to announce, I think we may have announced this before, that CDE has received a $93 million charter schools program grant for 2024 through 2029. And under this grant, they will provide technical assistance through CASI to charter school authorizers, which is an absolute priority for the grant. And we'll do trainings and continue the work that we have started. And thank you to all of the authorizers who have come to CASI events as participants and guest speakers. And stay tuned for more details on the new grant. Next slide, please. So just a reminder that CASI's mission is to provide technical assistance and networking to ensure that charter schools are serving students well and following the law. And District Office of Education authorizers and, District or County Office of Education authorizers are welcome to join CASI. There are about 329 authorizers across the state, most of which we call smalls, meaning that they either have one or two schools in their portfolio, and or the authorizers themselves are small or rural authorizers. And our emphasis is actually on serving those folks because that's where most assistance is needed. All right, and we've also formed a partnership with the Small Districts Association to have access to those folks. Next slide, please. And so I want to share our normal caveat, but I want to add a little extra today, since we'll be featuring several examples of how different authorizers have helped prepare their boards for renewals. We want to be certain to be clear that they are sharing their own experience and examples and perspectives. And so anything that you hear here, before you apply it to your specific situation, please make sure that you review the law and the regulations and consult with your own legal counsel to ensure that you are doing what's right for your agency. Next slide, please. Okay, so today we will not have time to review the criteria and the process for renewals again. We did that in April, and so you can go to the CASI website at CDE and find that recording if you need to know kind of the basics about renewals. We will highlight some things that are important for boards to know, and we will discuss some substance about the board procedures and appeals to the state board, but because we will not be reviewing much of the substance of renewals, please do enter questions into the chat or raise your virtual hand to ask questions, and we'll try to give you a brief explanation to help you understand something that maybe is you need some support on. Okay, next slide, and I turn it over to Tom.
All righty. So good morning, everybody. This is kind of the plan for the day. We're going to talk generally, and including hearing from Dave Patterson, who is a Placer County trustee, why we think it's a good idea to start, preparing your authorizing board for charter renewals ahead of time before one's right in front of them, how to engage the board on authorizing more generally than just at renewal time. And for that, we'll wind up the session today with one of our guest speakers really talking about how they've systematized things. We'll share different options for how to go about preparing the board, again, with an emphasis more on the how and not on the what in terms of the substance of renewals. But we will talk about some of the content of trainings that you might want to consider, and people will share their examples. Then we'll share a version that we've done at CASI, but we also wanted to hear from a variety of authorizers from around the state who've taken different approaches to this. So we're very grateful to have some guest speakers to do that. We have a bunch of materials in the resource folder where you can see some of the examples of things that people have tried and get ideas. If you wanted to prepare a resource or a slide deck or something, you can have some examples to look at there. And again, as Mifala said, because we're focusing more on the how than on the what, if we've alluded to something in the process that, oh, I remember we said something about that in April. What's that again? It's okay to raise your hand and ask just to get that clarification, but because we won't be retilling that whole ground. So then with that, I'm going to turn it over to David so we can get a perspective directly from a board member on his thoughts on being prepared as an authorizer board member for renewals.
Okay,
Next
next
slide.
slide. There, great. Okay, well, welcome to Friday, everyone. I've had over the last 30 years the privilege of sitting in virtually every seat that's possible in the charter sector, and that has included in the seat that many of you are sitting in, which is to be working for an authorizer and doing the oversight, Alameda County Office of Education. It's also work I did with the department when I was with the department. But I also have spent the last 12 years as a member of the Placer County Board of Education, and we've had charters. We've had to review charters. We've had to deal with renewals. We've had to work to not renew a charter. And so I think it's important that we talk a little bit about that, because this whole thing is about how to make sure your board has what they need and is really ready to do this work. So there's some reasons why I think at this point in time, it's especially important. One, it's been a while since we've done renewals. If you haven't done something in 3, 4, 5 years, that gets us out of practice as board members. And there's been, in that same time frame, there's been a lot of turnover, not only potentially of board members. So there's some board members that maybe have never had a charter renewal in front of them. They've never had that conversation, but also equally a turnover of staff. And so there may not be somebody in the driver's seat that's done this before. There's also been quite a bit of change in the rules. So renewal things with AB 1505, the rules are different. Now, these are also high stakes decisions, and sometimes they're politically charged. And so I think it's really important that people are aware of that, and if they're that they need to have the tools so they can make high quality decisions. And then I think on the state level, as well as locally, authorizers are under a great deal of scrutiny about the quality of the work we do as authorizers. And that's to do with the fact that there has been problems. The A3 fraud is probably the single example that we most think about. But the idea is that people are looking at us, and they have an expectation we do the job well. And then the thought I wanted to leave with you is that when board members lack quality information, we go with our heart, and then that can be really that's not what we're supposed to do in a data-driven decision. So and different members of boards that they run on pro charter and con charter issue, all that politics is in fact not what is helpful to making a high quality authorizing decision. Next slide, please. So here's some of the lessons that I'd like to share about preparation for a board. It goes back to board members go from the heart. They want to do what's right, but they need both background knowledge, which means this can't be the first time they've talked about this. Can't be the first time that there's been a discussion. But they need background knowledge of what are charter schools, and then a clear understanding of what their job is. What are they supposed to do, and what are others supposed to do so they in fact can be ready. And also, board members want to know about these schools, not just in a renewal process, but about the schools and the students and the families they serve. These are members of their community. These are their kids and their families, and so they take a very personal interest. And sometimes that gets lost in the process. It's really important because that's where we as board members come from. And then they want to know about the law. They want to know specifically, okay, what does the law say I need to consider? They want to know what their guardrails are, and they really do want to know how, in fact, how they do their job and how they do it well, and how they need to be prepared for that job. Next slide, please. So hopefully the point is, this is not their first discussion. And if it is, or hasn't been for a while, it's time to get that started. Now, the key question that we all as authorizers, try to make sure everybody recognizes is when does renewal start? And of course, the answer is it starts the day an approval is made. And so, are there ways that the authorizing comes up periodically on a board agenda? We're going to hear some talk about how Alameda is doing that in a really great way now. Does your office issue annual reports? Are they on the board's agenda? Do they look ahead? Do they talk about is the school on track for renewal? What are the challenges they're facing? For that, I do want to mention that CCAPS has recently updated its annual review toolkit, version 2. We just got it out there that has those has that focus built in, and it has caught up on all the changes in law and everything else. Now, we've done CASI trainings before, but as we're going to talk about in a little bit, there's a lot to learn also from the field, and I'm looking forward to the conversations of our colleagues about how they're doing it in their own districts and counties. Next slide, please. And the last one is I'll just share that pictures are worth 1,000 words, and this is one of the ones that I find helpful, but. The basic point to you is that boards react well when you can see something visually. And this one is really good at helping them understand, oh, this is a multi-year process, and here's where we are. Maybe we're in year 4 for some, but maybe we're in fact year 3 or 4, so we have time to also do some of our homework. With that, I'll pass it on.
All right, next slide, please. So with regards to getting your board prepped, there are several different options for how you can do that. One of them is you can have an agenda item in a regular board meeting, like an information item. You could also have like Santa Clara does, we have a standing charter school update at every single board meeting. You could also have a board study session. Those can be at a special board meeting, anyway, do a board study session. You can also provide written guidance on renewals. If you've got a Friday update or a weekly update, you can include information there. You can also do it as part of updating your board policy or your policies on charters. When you're writing your annual reports, you can add information into those annual reports explaining how things work. You can do a renewal information as part of your board session on annual reports, or also as part of your opening statements in the actual renewals. You should also encourage board members to attend sessions on renewals at education conferences. I know that at Santa Clara, we also have a new board member training for every single new board member, specifically on their requirements around charter schools. So there are lots of different options for board preparation. Bottom line is you need to do it. So next slide, please. So what are some of the content that needs to be in there? Well, specifically the renewal process needs to be there. They need to understand the timelines. They need to understand the standards. They need to understand the high, middle, and low and what those equate to. You need to make sure that the board understands their role versus the staff's role. You also need to know whether or not the board would prefer to have you, the staff, make a recommendation or simply provide the information that doesn't make a recommendation that just basically says, here's the data and you now get to decide. They need to understand the actual appeal process and timelines and standards of review. And they also need to know where their schools are and basically how they're doing. So that's a lot of different content that you can put across all of those various types of information for board training. Next slide. And I will say again, as Dave put it, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So here is a picture that we created at Santa Clara County to try and share for our board what that actual renewal process looks like, specifically towards where it goes for appeals. And with that information, I'm going to pass it off to Craig.
All right, thank you, Michelle. So I'm Craig Heimbichner. I'm the Education Administrator for the Charter Schools Division at the California Department of Education, and I'm going to be reviewing the State Board of Education appeals process. As we probably know, there have been major changes in the past several years in how charters can appeal and on what basis they can appeal as they move from district to county to the state board. And so under Ed Code section 47605K, and this was coming out of the legislation of AB 1505, if a charter is denied by the county, if it's gone up to that level, the charter school may submit to the State Board of Education within 30 days of the county's denial. Timelines are always important to pay attention to. And in Ed Code 47605K2, here's where they incorporated specifically from AB 1505, the language. The review standard has changed from what used to be just a complete 15-element review, what we call a de novo review, which was a fresh look at the petition. It's now an abuse of discretion review, and it's very different. It's much narrower. And so we're not going to give legal advice, but the best legal advice I can give is consult your own legal counsel because you'll need it if it goes through this process. Next slide. So what is this all about, abuse of discretion? Well, the standard is it's arbitrary, capricious, entirely lacking in evidentiary support, unlawful, or procedurally unfair. This was from our State Board of Education's memo from July 2022, kind of laying out what is the abuse, what is the standard, that the bar to meet if you're going to appeal based on abuse of discretion. So reversal of the denial requires abuse of discretion by both the district and the county. It is a very narrow standard. It is a high bar. It's not to say that it cannot be met, certainly not. But one should know if you're going to make this appeal, what you're likely to be, how you're likely to be viewed through this process in terms of the high bar and the narrow standard. So abuse of discretion is the most deferential standard of review, under which the state board must give deference to the decisions of the governing board of the school district and the county board of education to deny the petition. Next slide. So before it's submitted to the state board, the charter school has to gather certain things. They have to submit the written appeal, the original petition, not a modified one, district board and county board findings, and also the documentary record from the district and the county, including transcripts from the meetings when the petition was denied. Now, video with timestamps has been accepted in the past as a transcript. So We encourage, of course, an actual transcript, but that has come in and been accepted. District and county must provide documentary record to the petitioner within 10 days of request. Again, timeline's important. Petitioner sends appeal and all materials to the State Board of Education through us, through the Charter Schools Division at the California Department of Education, the district and the county at the same time. So that's another one to pay attention to, that they all get notified and everybody is sent all of the materials at the same time. Next slide. And then the CDE reviews and makes a recommendation, and there are 2 or 3 actions that can come about from the review. First, it goes to the Advisory Commission on Charter Schools, or ACCS, as typically everything does that's charter related before it goes to the state board. Those are alternating meetings every other month. Next week, there's an ACCS meeting. I'm presenting at that one. The following month, there's a State Board of Education meeting. Typically, that's how it goes. And so the presentation is made by CDE, and the ACCS recommends to the state board to either hear this or summarily deny it. Now, if it moves forward to the state board, then the state board decides to hear it or to deny it as well. They have that choice, just like ACCS makes a recommendation. The buck really stopped with the state board on this, though. If the state board hears it, the state board determines whether to affirm the denial. It's kind of strange language, but that's the language in law, to affirm the denial or to reverse it. And this is important. They may reverse only upon finding abuse of discretion by both the district and the county. So that was subject to some controversy in the first few appeals, but this is how it's been ironed out so far. And so this is where we are in the following the language of the statute very closely. Next slide. Some previous State Board of Education appeal topics. We're just giving some examples. What's come in and what were the allegations of abuse? What sort of things were brought forward? Well, the findings were not supported by the evidence. Those were some allegations we typically got from the appeal. Some said the findings were unlawful. Some said they failed to proceed in a manner required by law. For example, some said they imposed unlawful requirements. They went past what was in the law. The community impact analysis was not correct. It was sort of a thin basis for that. Some said the board action was flawed. Again, make sure your boards know what they're doing. Some said the county failed to provide de novo review. In other words, they just took whatever the district said. They didn't really do their own study. Some said ratification was flawed. Some said the equivalent time and procedures requirement was really egregiously violated. Some said the transcript was not provided. There were others, but these are just some examples. Now, these were some of the bases by which the appeals were made. Does that mean that these were all found by the state board to be supported by the documentary record or the evidence? The state board, like the department, will try to weigh these allegations based on those. So it really has to come down to, is something in the documentary record that really backs this up? And that's something to keep in mind. And the state board, in many cases, was not persuaded based on their role of viewing the statute in a very narrow and deferential sense. So if you're going to bring it forward, make sure you've got a strong case. Again, it could be that there is abuse of discretion, but it's the sort of a deferential standard, a need for the documentary record to really back it up that we must keep in mind. Again, I'm not giving legal advice. I'm just kind of recounting the history here. Always consult your legal counsel. And let's see, next slide. The timeline from the first submission to the State Board of Education appeal, the general timeline is 3 to 4 months for the district decision, 3 to 4 months for the county decision, and 4 months for the State Board of Education decision. Again, in some cases, there can be a mutual agreement to extend. So that's why we have some variety in there. The minimum is a 10 to 12-month process. So that should be kept in mind. If you're going to get the school open at a certain point, you have to sort of do a backwards mapping and look at the calendar of when these can go to the state board and the ACCS. It can be 14 months. It can be a while before this appeals process is fully completed. Next slide. So a sample renewal timeline is given here. At the bottom, you see an asterisk. There is a 2024-25 State Board of Education Appeals submissions deadlines link, and you can go and check that out to get the actual calendar dates. But just to give an example to show how long this can take, Charter submits renewal to district August 10th, 2024. District decision is a few months later, November 9th, 2024, and they say denied. County appeal filed December 10th, 2024. County decision March 8th, 2025, and that's a denial. So we're looking from all the way from August to March here, and it's still denial. State Board of Education appeal filed March 10th, 2025. ACCS meeting June 2025. And then the state board meeting July 9th and 10th, 2025. So let's say, let's look at that from August to July, almost a full year before it gets to the state board. That's a sample. So just to illustrate, this is a lengthy process. And again, pay attention to all the deadlines and all the requirements. Next slide. And I think it's back to you, Tom.
Yeah, thanks very much, Craig. And we should just, Craig can relate to our situation in that the department are staffing their board on renewal decisions, and the ACCS for that matter, just like we're staffing our board. So it was great to hear directly from Craig from their lofty perspective up at the state board about how these things come in. So now we're getting to the point where we're going to turn it over to a variety of other examples kind of at the ground level of the field. And we're actually going to start with one of our own from CASI. And then we're going to ask Kathy Morris from Kern County. We'll hear Neil McChesney from Contra Costa can't join us today, so I'll just give highlights from what he did. We're going to hear from Amanda Goldman in Sac City, and then we're going to wind up with Juan Lam from Alameda for their process that Dave alluded to already. So first, we've been doing some of these conversations ourselves at CASI, and so I'm going to have Michelle recount one that we did recently.
So just a couple of weeks ago, we were at the California School Boards Association County Board Member Services Conference in Monterey, and we talked to county boards members about their role in charter renewals. So in that presentation, we went through essentially Renewal 101 with board members, giving them a high-level look. And we also included a couple of resources. And they're in your resource packet so that you can have them available as well. So the first one was, what do you need to know and do planning document? It's a series of questions. It says, please input your schools, what level they're at, and when they're supposed to be up for renewal. And then starts asking those questions. What do you know about this school? The other document is the SCCOE one-page summary of the performance tiers. And it's pretty and color-coded and gives all of that high-level look of what do you need to know if a school falls into the high, middle, or low category. And it's a nice, quick one page that you can hand to a board so that they can have it as they're walking through. Next slide, please.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. And with that, we're getting to our first authorizer example. And we also had the opportunity at CASI to bring the CASI show on the road to do a training for Kathy Morris and her colleagues at the Kern County Superintendent of Schools on this topic. But we got in a conversation about the steps that she had taken prior to that relative to her board as opposed to her colleagues on the staff. So we asked her if she could share some of that experience with us here today. So Kathy.
Good morning. I'm going to share just a snippet of how our office approached charter renewals with our board this year. Before I do that, though, I just want to give you a context of how we've approached charter renewals in the past with our site visit reviews and reports. We typically visit our schools and complete a report in the spring and present that to our board early fall. With the advent of 1505, we didn't have that information. We would normally in those reports provide information to the board as to where a charter is being tracked in regard to renewal criteria. But now what we did this last year, since we didn't have the information and it's changed, we at a regular board meeting in May did a training and presentation to our board on the new renewal criteria. As I was planning that, I was thinking about what our board members needed. And I realized we had veteran board members who had been through the renewal process previously, and we had brand new board members who'd never been through it. So what we did was we did the CASI CCAP kind of renewal 101 for them. And however, as I was thinking about it, I was thinking about our charters, realized that we have had a low tier charter coming up for renewal this year that was in low tier based on criterion 2. And I knew that if I just read the ed code to the board members regarding criterion 2, they were going to look at me kind of like Ferris Bueller looked at his teacher on his day off, just kind of la, la, la. And so I knew I needed to give them an example. So I developed a fairly simple example for them before I introduced the ed code to criterion 2, so that they could it help them visualize how it translated from the CASP to the criteria 2 in regard to at least the ELA and math part of that. And then what we did was we developed a graphic slide for each charter that clearly showed how the charter did in comparison to the state. And at the bottom of the slide, a clear answer, yes or no, did the charter perform better than the state for all students and each of the subgroups. So it was very clear to the board how, since that we did have a criterion to school, how it ended up being in the low tier based on that criteria for criterion 2. I have a suggestion. If you come to this charter authorizing and renewal work with a business or fiscal background, you might want to collaborate a little bit with your curriculum instruction and assessment people to get a better understanding of how the CASP translates to criterion 2. I think the most important concept to consider is who your board members are and what they need to understand as to how a particular charter gets from point A to point B on the charter renewal process. At the end of my presentation, I did have one question, and it was as to whether I felt the new renewal criteria was better than the old. And I said, this is my opinion, but I felt that the new renewal criteria was more holistic. It took a more holistic approach as to what the charter is doing to affect student performance, whereas the previous method was basically based on test scores. So that was my input for you.
Great. Thank you very much, Kathy. And before we move on to the next example, we can open it up to see if anybody has questions. And again, you can raise your hand or put them in the chat. And I'll lead off with one. And not to put you on the spot, Kathy, but it occurred to me that one thing worth mentioning for those of you in county boards is not only having your radar as to your own authorized schools renewals, but what's happening in your districts in terms of the renewals and how many potentially could be coming your way on appeal if it looks like they're currently at risk of being in the low tier, just so that you can have that in mind as well. And Kathy, I wondered, what was your approach to sort of discussing that with your board or your team in terms of the districts in your county?
Well, to be honest, Tom, I don't foresee that happening. Most of
Oh, okay.
our charters are dependent, so they'll go through their districts. And the one small district that we have that authorizes independent charters, I don't foresee them denying them. So I don't. We don't have an issue with that.
I bet you that there are some envious colleagues among your county boards on this call as I hear that. So, are there other questions for Kathy before we moved on to the next example? Anybody want to raise your hand or just speak up or post one in the chat? Okay, well, when we get to the end, we probably will have some time to loop back if other questions occur to you. So why don't we move on to the next slide and the next example? And this one, I will relay greetings from Neil McChesney, who couldn't be with us today, but he also did a briefing, I think a two-step briefing for his board on charter renewals. Theirs was more in the nature of a board study session, a standalone meeting to talk about this versus an agenda item on their regular meeting. They walked through, among other things that he did, they already have a renewal filed, so he walked through that as his concrete example of the one that was already pending. He walked them through, we will have some DAS schools coming up, so remember they're not under the tiers, so how does that work for them? How do we come to an agreement about what the academic metrics are going to be there? He tied in the connection to, as part of the renewal process, how they approach having an MOU with the schools. So we wanted the board to understand that that was part of the process as well. He invited board members to submit their questions, along the way. Anytime something comes up, hey, I wanted to be clear on this point, just submit them to the superintendent, and they'd make sure they got those questions answered for them. And then for our purposes, he invited CCAP to come be an external co-presenter, and he had us walk his board through some of the same territory that Craig covered for us today on appeals. And let me just say, as a practical tip, Neil is perfectly capable of presenting on how appeals work. I think one consideration, you may not want to bring in anybody from the outside to co-present, but just like with any presentation, sometimes divvying up the work helps if you've got a lot of ground to cover, and sometimes if you're this topic is new or you're new to your staff, having some external validation from somebody from outside the organization might be worth considering. But that was how Neil chose to approach his. So those are really the highlights there. If we could stop if there's any questions on that one, and if anybody wants to pipe up, raise your hand or post them in the chat, and if not, keep those questions in your mind, and we can move on and hear any going once, going twice. I don't see any. So, oh wait, here we go. Just a note, Suzanne. What, Suzanne? You can just speak up if you want, because rather than me reading this thing.
Okay, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, great. Sorry, I'm on the phone, so I wasn't sure. No, I was just noting on the sample renewal timeline that realistically, if a school were to get their appeal from the state board in the first week of July, by that point, most of their staff and students would have left and found new schools. Their facilities agreements could expire and so on. So just in discussing that timeline, if providing a timeline, I think it would be important to provide the context that would not really be considered viable often. So like a March is usually more when the staff's contracts are coming up and things like that. So that's more viable. But I think most charter schools aren't looking for an appeal, but just wanted to provide that context around that date.
If I could respond, that is a very good point. It was not, I guess I should have said that's not an ideal timeline. It is a timeline that has happened, and as you say, it is a difficult timeline to operate on. And you're right that it's earlier is better. So thank you for that point.
Yeah, and that there's a related point there, which I think we discussed in April, but that is, there has been discussion around the state about, from a policy perspective, the optimal time to file for renewal is in the final year of the term. You have another year of academic data. That's kind of what makes sense. But if you are a school that is backwards mapping this entire appeal process and contemplating it, you may be thinking about or getting advice from your lawyer that you ought to consider going in earlier to allow for enough time, just as Suzanne and Craig allude to. So that may be something for you to be tracking as you're mapping out your own potential renewals, is not assuming that everyone will come in the final year of its term, because there could be some who are concerned about that last year and want to get out ahead of things a little bit.
And this,
Okay.
Suzanne, I just want to acknowledge, I understand why people want the latest data from the school. I think that's perfectly reasonable. And I think it's just a struggle that the law is giving more time, which is important to give everyone at every level sufficient time for review. But that's just like the trade-off. So that's just a bind, I think.
Yeah,
Thanks.
that's right. All right. Thanks, Suzanne. With that, let's turn it over to Amanda Goldman for our next slide. From Sac City. In fact, I'm going to steal your thunder on just one minor point, Amanda, which is she is one who has had a renewal petition filed early for this very reason, is that they're kind of concerned about the last year and want to give themselves plenty of time. But I won't take any more of your talking points, Amanda. Let's turn it over to you.
Hi, folks. Happy to be here today. I think I just want to note a couple things before I start talking about my most recent example. As many of you know, I am really new to this game. And so I say that both as a disclaimer. I've been in this role for a year and a half, but also like if you're sitting here going, we don't have all these things in place, guess what? That's okay, because a year ago, I had none of these things in place either. Tom had asked me to speak both from the district perspective, but particularly from the perspective of a district where we have a very, very busy board agenda. Of course, everyone does, but large urban district that authorizes 16 schools, like there's lots of things. Our board meetings are regularly 3 to 6 hours long, at least twice a month. Like getting things on the board agenda is a real struggle. And also, I don't have a board that is interested in engaging in things like study sessions or doing a lot of regular back and forth communication. So if you go to the next slide, please, Allison, what I want to talk about is how did we handle that very recently? Some of you may have been following in the news, with a very political renewal that happened as our first renewal of, the 7 years that we've had renewals. So since we've had renewals. So what I did on these slides was I put in that green font is everything that was presented in public session, either in a board session, in board communication, which all of our board communications are public, or in nope, those are the two things. So what that means is you can go find them, but also like we were doing a lot of one-way engagement with our board. So there's actually no times when the board engaged with me outside of public session. And so again, you can all watch those. But so in March, we had some concerns arise. Some of our board trustees were contacted with concerns about 2 of our schools that have the same entity. So we'll just say one for right now. And, the trustee asked some questions, just like, are you aware of these things? But that was the extent of that engagement. In May, those concerns were brought to public session and public comment and in formal written letters to the board that were also then made very public. At that same meeting, I was presenting an information item, much like was shared earlier on like, what's the process? What should you all be expecting? And it just happened to be on the same meeting. So I think what was nice there is that I was already in front of them saying that we had process. And so then they were very quickly able to ask, and so what's the process? What's going to happen next with these concerns? So we immediately sent a board communication that responded to the things that had been brought up in public session and outlining our plan forward. And we sent a letter, also a letter summarizing that to the school, just so that it was like communication both ways. We did not want it to be one-sided in any way. Next slide, please, Allison. So then we were in June. We did another information item specific to how we were going to investigate the concerns that had been brought and the how that process would look with relationship to renewal. Legal counsel was present, but frankly, I did that one we kind of did half and half. And again, anything we presented in open session, we then followed up with a board communication with like, remember, here are all the things we said. So if the visual that we provided you in the board meeting didn't make sense, here's another tool. Here's another tool. Here's another tool. Just trying to really provide all the resources they could possibly want, and then inviting them to ask for help whenever they wanted it, which of course they didn't, but that's okay. And then next slide, please. So then we got to July when the board is not in session, but that was based on where we were in our timeline when we concluded our investigation of the concerns and had to issue notice to cure. And we had to do it in that timeline because we had to make sure we had enough time in our 30 days, et cetera. This is the only time in the process that we sent any confidential communication. And the only thing that we sent was just to notify the board that the notice was ready to go out, and we asked them to embargo it for 48 hours so that we had time to meet with the school and present it to the school first. We didn't think it was right for the school to hear it from the media, and we knew that that would happen since it was all public. And then after that 48 hours, again, that became public as well. Next slide. We got to August. Again, this was all happening very fast. We had our initial public hearing, and that was also when the corrective action plan was received from the school. As some of you probably saw, we had a lot of media attention on this, a lot of local media. And again, we were just trying to be transparent and really focus on process. Anything that we put out like a blanket statement publicly. That was how that went. And then next slide, please, Allison. And then finally, September, we had our staff report. Again, our staff report was published publicly on our website. It was sent, of course, directly to the board and board communication. What we really tried to do was a much shorter report. I mean, short is relative, and it was still 20 pages. We did like color coding and highlighting to really help the board find the pieces that were most relevant. It included summaries of legislation, how the things connected. And we really tried to make it like, yes, you're getting a packet of 500 pieces of paper for every board meeting. We're going to make ours as clear as possible. And then similarly, when we had our final hearing, the vote on the petition, we gave the board all the options. We had the board packet that had all of the items in it that had gone back and forth. So again, there was no question. It was all in one place, and put that out publicly in the board packet. So it was a lot of things. If you could go to the last slide, please, Allison. So for me, like, this was also our very first renewals, essentially with this board and definitely in my tenure. So our goals that I think were helpful, we kept everything super factual, super simple, and as short as possible. And that was hard. I wanted to educate on every point, and I really had to pull back and say, okay, no, what is what they need to know here? We focused about 90% on process, right? So just here's our process. We're following process. We're not making it up as we go along. Here's our process. Here's our process, just over and over and over again. And then whenever I presented, we'd also then zoom out to the big picture. What's the big picture? How do we understand that this charter school has autonomy to make decisions? You might not like the decisions, but that's not necessarily your role. So 90% process, 10% big picture in every communication. really trying to focus on what mattered, which again is a challenge because you want to put all the stuff in there, but it was like, nope, yes, this is a thing, yes, it's this thing, but no, those are not what matters. And really what it came down to is if it's already public, it's already a public document. And that was really important because we were getting so many requests. I mean, we were getting PRA requests on the daily. We were getting like, every media request. And we just didn't want any opportunity to mess that up. So we made sure that anything that we were doing was already in a public transparent space. And to that end, you can find all of them on either our charter page or on their board page, or of course you could email me and I'll help you out. But yeah, that was we had the vote about 2 weeks ago. The charter school was renewed. And frankly, like it was quite a process. It was quite an adventure.
Well, thank you very much, Amanda. Let's open it up for questions. Anybody, maybe especially if you're kind of in a, that kind of high scrutiny under the microscope situation. Any questions for Amanda about how she navigated that or anything else that she's talked about? All righty. Well, we're next up is supposed to be Alameda County. We already knew ahead of time that Joanne Lamb was going to be finishing up another meeting before she could join us. So we have the opportunity to do this now while we're awaiting her arrival, and that is we have a lot of folks besides the ones you've heard from today who are in this process already, are looking ahead to this process or may have been down this path before. And I'd love to hear from others who are willing, kind of on short notice, just to share if you have other ideas that you've tried, or even if it's not something different from what you've heard, like the approach that we took was this, even if it's similar to the examples you've heard today. So would anybody like to be brave and volunteer and step up? And I could also, to put them on the spot to get things going, if people want to organize their thoughts, maybe start with our colleagues from Santa Clara or Dave from Placer and ask them, how does it look in your county offices? As we heard from Michelle about how CASI did a training, but we could also hear about how things are going in your counties. And then if others have examples, please raise your hand or put your name in the chat and we'll call on you next. Dave, you want to start?
Well, one example of what we've done recently is we use the opportunity to review our charter school policy to do a deep dive into what we wanted to incorporate on our stuff. So we started with the CSBA draft policies, but then we modified them to fit both a county context, which wasn't there. But we also then were able, because it was a committee of the board, we have a subcommittee on policy, that we also made sure we build in the views and approaches and expectations from the board in there to the degree that made sense. And then, frankly, going forward, we need to do some additional work about how we, in fact, put that. For example, we have handbooks right now for interdistrict appeals and for expulsions, two things that county boards do. But we're also trying to think of an efficient way to make sure that we have that our charters are aware of what our procedures are and how to do all that. And for that, we are clearly a work in progress. We do not have the type of public information that some of our colleagues do. I'll pick on Riverside, for example, Riverside County, which does such an excellent job. But that's just one example of using a vehicle, in this case, making sure we have good policy, and then using it as our platform for conversation.
Michelle, did you want to share anything from your end? I mean, I know we even used in the resources, we have the example of your data book, sort of the check-ins along the way through the whole life cycle of the school, but what's going on in Santa Clara County?
I can jump in. So
okay.
I don't know when it was, but I started with kind of an overall renewals 101, starting back with, the new rules around AB 1505. And then at least we have 2 meetings a month. So at least one of those meetings from our standing charter update, I would do a presentation. For example, I did one on appeals, one on the high, middle, and low performing charter schools. And before each public hearing, I kind of do, so if we had a high performing charter school, I'd talk about what it means to be a high performing charter school and what the rules are around renewal for that. If we have a low performing charter school, before they hear the public hearing, I would talk about what it means to be a low performing charter school and what the rules around renewal are for them. So just kind of preparing them overall and then going back, giving them little pieces right before they need it.
Okay, great. Were there other examples before we get to Joanne and Alameda County of folks who just want to share, again, open season on questions, but other examples of how you have handled or thought about getting your board ready for this process?
I can share what we did at Oakland
Great.
Unified. Hi, everyone. My name's Madison Thomas. We did a board study session, so similar to what we've heard today. But one thing that I think was really helpful for us was we did little mini renewal case studies for our board members. So we put together kind of like mini data staff reports for them to kind of work through so that they could be more familiar with the data that they were going to be looking at in our staff reports now. And that I think was really helpful because we had cases where schools were in the middle tier or schools were in the high tier, and they got to kind of like hands-on work together on how to sort through everything. And it was also fun because we got to put them on the spot like they so frequently put us on the spot in public. So definitely had a good time with that. And I think it was really helpful for them in terms of getting familiar with the data.
Great. Thank you for sharing that, Madison. Any questions for Madison or for that matter for Dave or Mayfala? All right, let's see. Anybody else care to share the things that they have done or what it looks like in your district or your county? Going once, going twice. All right. Well, now we have our last guest speaker. We're very happy to have Joanne Lamb join us. Those of you who were at the CCAP conference this past summer had a chance to hear what they're doing in this regard. Joanne was joined by one of her board members, and then we had the opportunity where I could actually listen to it because I wasn't running around taking pictures of every session. And at the county boards meeting in Monterey that Michelle alluded to, where they also presented, and Joanne was joined by both her board chair and her superintendent for that presentation. But again, going back to the idea that renewal starts on the day you approve the petition, they've really systematized their approach to check-ins on the trajectory of their schools at Alameda County. And here to share that is Joanne.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. So before we start, I just wanted to say that yes, this is definitely focused on how to prepare boards and your board of trustees for charter renewals and potential appeals and all of the other charter items that come up in day-to-day authorizing. But I think it's really hard to separate the board work from staff work, as in if your system is not cohesive and you're not clear about roles and responsibilities and all of those pieces, it's going to be really hard to have a cohesive presentation in front of the board and for the board members to really understand kind of what are the asks that we have of the Board of Trustees. So just wanted to say that because there is a little bit of a focus on in some of this in the next slides about kind of how to cohesively coordinate, between your staff and the Board of Trustees. So with that, if we can go to the next slide. Okay, so we just have 3 intended outcomes here. We just wanted to provide an overview of our strategy for strategic planning for this upcoming year. Wanted to provide some links to resources which include presentations and tools, and hopefully they will be of service to you. or at least get you thinking about what might be applicable in your own context, because we certainly understand that the context very much matters, and what may work for Alameda County may not work for your context. And the third is hopefully to, as Tom already alluded to, we're happy to take questions and have this more of a conversation to answer specific questions. All right, next. Okay, so I kind of structured this into three big buckets. We're really talking about the foundational work. And when I say foundational work, it's really the work that I see that we need to start with Board of Trustees before we do any kind of renewal. So hopefully it's the work that we have been engaging in this past year, as well as this fall, in preparation for the charter renewals. Then there is ongoing work. So, things that we're doing right this minute as we are going through the actual renewal cycle. And then I have some feedback on kind of the real-time action reflections that we do. So in terms of foundational work, I think one of the things that is very clear, that very clearly needs to get done, is really an understanding of the roles and responsibilities. So this may seem like a silly thing to do. Of course, we know our roles and responsibilities, but I have to say, from our standpoint, when we were going through this process, it was very clear to us that our Board of Trustees, when we assessed their readiness posture, really were not very clear about the difference between a governing board and a board that is really authorizing charters. So many of the functions that they were doing really were acting as if they were, the governing board of the charter or whatnot. There were a lot of conversations about kind of what those differences are. So I think that that's very, that absolutely needs to be done in the context of this work. The second thing I'm going to go into a lot of detail on is what we did for our charter liaison reports to kind of ready our board for this renewal cycle. If you don't have a charter policies and procedures manual, I strongly recommend having one. I think that there have been many sessions, both at many different forums, to talk about how to do this, how to establish a policies and procedures manual. It's for me, it's really critical that policies and procedures manual is also approved by the Board of Trustees, so that they are really clear about what the processes are, what they've agreed to. And so there's also a transparency with charter leaders about what is expected. And I think that has really helped us. And then the last one for foundational work is really around the preview of calendaring and timelines. So nobody likes surprises. And so just really being able to see what are we anticipating, with also an expectation that, of course, things will change as we go forth. And so, how do we pivot and keep updated about the different timelines? That is really important. So the second part that I wanted to highlight is really just the ongoing work. So what are some of our communication organizational strategies in order to engage with our Board of Trustees? There's many different levels of communication here. So there's our communication with our Board of Trustees, between superintendents, our staff, our districts that are also going through their renewal process for charter schools, and then advocacy groups. So the advocacy groups, I think of as California Teachers Association, as definitely California Charters School Association, many other advocacy groups around for our context in the Bay Area. So the real-time action reflections are really kind of what we do for the protocols for reflection, really being very clear about, as you're going through this process, I think we definitely have a tendency to be done with one renewal and then move on to the next. But one thing that we have implemented for this year is really making sure that we have a structured time in order to reflect and to really make those real times continue. So we're walking the walk just like anybody else is around continuous improvement. And so we don't ever start a renewal cycle until we actually have gone through a protected time around what do we do well, what do we need to do better, and that includes all levels of the renewal process. So that's been kind of a key change for us as well this year. All right, so on to the next slide. Okay, so I talked a little bit about the foundational work, and I'm going to go into a little bit more details here. So if we can go to the next slide. So this was our, what I alluded to earlier around roles and responsibilities. So we last year had what we called a charter reset in February of 2023. And this was one of the slides that we had from that slide deck. And it was really just, again, articulating what's the role of the different agencies in this. So what's the role of the state legislature, the State Board of Education, the county office, and the school districts that we partner with that also have charter schools. And so this is really helpful for, I think, especially if you have new board trustees who are first time, engaging in this process, for them to kind of understand a 10,000-foot view about what are the roles and responsibilities. All right, the next one. Oh, sorry, there is animation apparently that goes along with it. Okay. So last year, one of the things that we did that was the highlight of our California School Boards Association that Tom mentioned is that we really felt the need to engage our Board of Trustees in charter authorizing. And we really thought hard about, I apologize, there's a lot going on outside. So one of the things that we really thought about is, what do our boards really need to know about our charter schools that will really prepare them for a season of renewal? And one of the things that we very much wanted to do was to actually get them engaged in data so that they would not be first looking at all of this data during a renewal cycle. So they would actually be engaged at a high level for all of the 13 charter schools that we authorize, that they would be able to see, what's the state of the state across all of these different schools. So we embarked on a year-long process with one of our board trustees, Angela Norman, and she was what we call the charter liaison. And so what this meant was she worked with myself and my team, and in preparing a whole scope and sequence that you can see here. And these are all live links that you can click on to see what are the different reports that were created. But every month at a board meeting, the trustee Norman, was tasked with presenting this information to all of the Board of Trustees. So this did a couple of things. So one, it really had a much clearer leadership on kind of understanding the data. And Trustee Norman was responsible for, really kind of presenting, to her colleagues about kind of, what all of this data means. It really strengthened the relationship between my division and Trustee Norman directly, because we would meet with her every month and we would talk about, what is important for you to know? What are you wondering about, this data? What is this data, going to answer for you? All of those questions. So this is the scope and sequence that we designed, and the timing is on purpose. So we started with demographics. And so many of the questions that she wanted to answer in terms of demographics was really around, what's the composition of our schools? What percentage of students are special ed, English learners? What's the racial makeup of the schools that we are authorizing? So we started there first. Trustee Norman and some of our other board trustees have a specific interest in special education. And so that was the second part that we brought in October for the board. And that one was pretty complex. There were a lot of questions for this. November and December were spent on staff vacancies, as many, across the state were grappling with teacher shortages. So they really wanted to know, how many vacancies are in each one of our schools, as well as, what is the teacher credentialing at the school. So this ended up being 2 parts. It was originally supposed to only be 1 part. And then we did. So I'm sorry, the teacher credentialing part ended up being 2 parts because there were follow-up questions in December and January. So that ended up to be a 2-part series. And then February, March, and April was really focused around the dashboard. So it was chronic absenteeism, graduation, college and career, and then English learner data. And so this kind of was the scope of the learning across the year. So this is really one of our primary strategies that we used to kind of get them acclimated to looking at the data. So I don't think it's too late, actually, even if we are, engaging in renewals now. I think that there are still definitely ways in order to understand that, the dashboard is about to come out October, mid-October. So there is definitely a lot of opportunity to engage our board of trustees in this work. I'm going to pause there first to see if there's any questions that I can answer about. We have not been clicking on these links, but they should be available to you so that you can kind of take a look at them at your own convenience. But I'm going to pause here for a second to see if there's any questions. Okay. So.
Not a question, Joanne, but I'll just mention before you were able to join us that we're getting a really good variety of things here, because Amanda's presentation was literally, how do I get some information in front of my board that they need when I have really a struggle to get any board time? And so what's the minimum I need to get? And you're like, here's a really robust example of when I have a very engaged. So it's a good range of things for people to consider. So I want people to, your own board and your own staff relationship with your board in your own district, county is going to fall somewhere on this continuum of what's doable. But this is an example on the other end of the continuum about a very engaged board in this.
Yes, and I will say, I feel very lucky. I've been in this for, a few years now, and I would say that, superintendents change and boards change. And so context changes. And I feel very lucky in the sense that we have a superintendent that was very supportive of this process, and we have our board of trustees was very supportive in this process, even though many of our veteran board trustees had never gone through this kind of a process. They were very supportive, but, I've definitely gone through phases where, it's a little bit, there's a lot more strategic thinking that needs to happen about, how to do this work. So I definitely want to recognize also that the context changes over time and will continue to change, as we are all in this work. The last thing that I will say about this is that I think one of the things that was really helpful in this process also was kind of an unintended consequence of this, which is that our charter schools were actually more engaged with us. And so, we sent out a copy of the data to them before it was presented at our board meetings, and they would come back with, actually this data is not correct, or, hey, like this data is, the data is actually like, we have a question about how you gathered it or whatnot. So it really kind of strengthened the relationship that way as well. I want to acknowledge Amanda's comment as well, that it's not that the superintendent or the board don't want to hear charter items. There's a lot of content that needs to go before the board in general. It definitely, sorry if my comment was that was definitely not my intention to say that the board is not engaged at all. That is, definitely that was not the intention. So,
and I'm sorry if my shorthand came across that way. That's not what I meant either.
Yeah. No, you guys are fine. I just was like, just wanted to be clear. You guys are great.
Yeah, no, that's, we definitely just different contexts, right? There's different competing priorities, and there's different things that we're trying to put in front of the board, and it's just never a simple linear process, and it doesn't stay static. So thank you for that feedback. Okay, so the next part is, if we can go to the next slide. Okay, so this is a link to our policies and procedures manual. We do think that this is really helpful. The one thing that I will definitely say about our policies and procedures manual is it takes more time than you think that it's going to take to get it across the finish line. It actually ended up taking, I think we were about 4 months over time. And one of the reasons that it was is that we really spent a lot of time really thinking about how to engage the advocacy groups. So we spent a lot of time engaging with the California Teachers Association, engaging with the California Charter School Association to just make sure that all of the feedback was addressed, even if there wasn't a change that was made based on the feedback. We just made sure that the feedback was addressed, and so that our board was very clear about kind of what feedback we were hearing about that as well. But we continually refer to our policies and procedures manual on a daily basis. So it is definitely time well spent, I think, if that is the direction that your organization is going in. Next slide. Okay, so this is an example of what we put in front of our board in February to get them to try to get them ready for the calendar that was coming up for this year. And so what this did really was make it very clear about kind of what we were anticipating the work to be for this year and then in the years coming up. And so it was kind of like a longer term look at what is coming down the pike. So what you'll probably notice from this is that when we go from 2023 to 24 to 24, 25, from that circle on the left, you can kind of see that we really, there's no renewals. And so we're going from like 0 to 250 miles an hour. And we needed, everybody to understand that, both our staff, our board trustees as well. So this kind of really helped them understand how much charter work was going to be put in front of them for this year and the years coming up. So what you can see here is that we do have, if you look under 24, 25, for Alameda County, we definitely, we know that we have 5 renewals that are coming up. But also what we do know is that we have a significant number of renewals at our district's schools, particularly in Oakland Unified. And so these are potential potential schools that we are looking at. These are schools that we're looking at for renewals and potential appeals. And so that is things that we are, just always continuing to track so that we're really sure that we can know what is, potentially coming down the pike. So this was very helpful to make it very, very real. And so I think that there is something to say in front of the Board of Trustees to say, hey, we have a lot of renewals coming, but it's a different thing to say, hey, we actually know that we have 5, and then, we have some other schools that we're watching out for as well. So highly recommend just putting everything into one slide so that they can not only see what is this year, but what is coming down for the next 3 to 4 years. Okay, next slide. All right, so just taking a pulse for kind of, you may have already been engaging in this conversation, but what's the current readiness posture for the Board of Trustees for charter renewals, and thinking about, is there any other foundational work that can be done based on what has been presented here that might be able to be applied in your own context? Feel free to unmute, put in the chat, anything that might be helpful. What are you thinking about?
Everybody, any thoughts on? We've kind of opened it up for questions a lot of ways, so it may be that people have chimed in who wanted to, and we'll have some time at the end as well. But
okay, I can keep going in that case. All right. Okay, so for ongoing work, if we can go to the next slide. So I just kind of bring this back, as I kind of alluded to in the beginning. I don't think that we can really make a clean delineation between what is board work and what is board work, and then what our staff does and our teams do on a day-to-day basis, because all of those things are interrelated in the system, even if we have different roles and responsibilities. And so some of the ideas that I'm bringing back here are things that I definitely have been thinking about in the last year and this year, to make sure that the communication with our board is seamless. And so things that I really thought a lot about with the directors this summer was really around project management, staff roles and responsibilities, and regular checkpoints. So project management, we spent a lot of time really looking at tools. We currently use Asana for a project management tool so that we can really be clear about the backwards planning and the calendaring that goes along with that, because, they're very, as we all know, they're very strict deadlines. And then we have all of the communications deadlines to the Board of Trustees outlined in our project management plan. So every touch point in terms of a board digest, every touch point around, when we need to communicate because there is a potential challenge or something that comes up, all of that is calendared in a project management tool. So, however the system is best set up for that, just doing some thinking about that. We spent a lot of time also this summer really thinking about staff roles and responsibilities. So my team does, in addition to charter authorizing, we also do all things accountability. And so there was really a need, I felt like in order to get through the year of the calendar that we just looked at, I really felt like there was a need to be very clear about what were the expectations of management and, what are the things that we want to achieve this year. So making sure that those are aligned to everybody's growth plans. And we did a lot of that pre-work this summer. And then what professional development opportunities, do you need for your team so that they are better able to really be able to do this work so that the entire system is functioning well. And then I would say there are regular checkpoints that we make sure to hold ourselves to. So what that means is that we check in with our charter schools on a regular basis. We also have a charter network that meets quarterly, and we bring back all critical information at that network. We have regular meetings with our districts around what is happening and what their timeline is for their own renewals. So I saw Madison here earlier from Oakland Unified. We have regular meetings with Kelly and Madison and her team. We actually structure those right after either one of our board meetings so that we know that they are timely updates that we need to touch base on. And so really strongly recommending that if you have districts that are also going through their own renewals, to make sure to be doing those additional those regular check-ins as well, because it really helps in streamlining the communication, because we know that and I'll just use Oakland as an example, we know that the Oakland board members potentially will be connecting with our county board members or Alameda County board members. And so if we are not well aligned in terms of what the communication is, then we know that, that part of the communication is also not going to be streamlined. So we make sure to do that. I also have regular checkpoints with our advocacy groups and to just hear offline what is happening with what they're hearing in the field, things that, oftentimes I hear in those one-to-one check-ins, things that are bubbling up that may not have not come to the surface yet, but it really helps me to kind of understand what the context is so that I can help mitigate if possible. And then things still happen, but we do our best in terms of getting ahead of challenges or roadblocks that we see. And then the next slide so this was a slide that we actually presented when we actually presented with Oakland Unified. And this was kind of our reflection on what our plan is and what our reality is. So we know that in our planning purposes, we really think of communication as concentric circles. So we would like our communications to be clear so that it goes outwards, so that we have our Alameda County staff members communicating with our board of trustees, and then communicating with district and charter community at large. And so this is always kind of how we structure our communications. But in reality, we know that it doesn't follow this concentric circle. We know that there are arrows that go, and I think that this might be, so we know that the arrows kind of go every which way, and that we have to pivot and be flexible in doing this, but one of the things that we are very clear about is always making sure that we're trying at all levels to be engaging with the different circles so that we're understanding at every context that we can what is happening so that we can best, again, help streamline the communications. And so this year, we really feel like had we not had a few years to basically hone in on these structures, this year would have been more difficult. But because we have put in some structures in place, we feel like definitely the communications so far has been pretty streamlined, and there have been not a whole lot of surprises. But if you check back in April, I'm sure that we will have some stories to tell you about how the circles went awry in this. Okay, next slide. Okay, I'm going to skip this one because I think we're doing questions. Oh, I also just wanted to say I did there are links. I think Tom will speak to this later, but I did put the links to all of the resources that are, I think, at the end somewhere. So if we can go to the next slide. So this is what I alluded to in the beginning about prioritizing reflection. So I am definitely guilty of this, where we complete one thing and we're off to the next thing because we don't have enough time. And so one thing that we definitely put in place this summer with my directors is really having part of our project management tool includes time for reflection. So that we are reflecting on how much staff time we spent on different review elements. These are some examples of questions we ask ourselves. These are not the only questions, but this is, definitely a part of it. What storylines were clear in the board presentation when we did it? What slides kind of need improvement? What didn't get clear? When I check in with our superintendent at my one-on-one, I am making sure to ask her for feedback about kind of what she heard from the board about the presentation itself and the process itself, so that we can make sure that when the next time that we do this, that we are tweaking things and kind of making continuous improvements to our own process. And so we do that for two different reasons. One, because we want to obviously learn from, what we're doing, and we want to continually, bring ourselves and elevate the ways that we are doing this work. The second reason really is because we want to be a model also, as we're talking to districts about continuous improvement and reflection, that we have to walk the walk and model that as well. And then the third piece, we've really been able to actually kind of get a pulse on kind of what the board trustees understand really clearly, and what things that we still need to make changes to, so that we can actually better meet their needs. And so again, just getting real-time feedback about how those things are. So those are kind of the pieces that we think about. And I think that is it. I think that's, yeah. So then it's just up for questions and discussions.
Any thoughts from anybody? I'll just share not a question, but an observation. I mean, I had the advantage of seeing the whole presentation in Monterey, and it was really it was impressive, but it was also, you could tell the appreciation and the buy-in from Joanne's board chair and superintendent for their comfort level at, feeling like they're really on top of this. And not everybody has the luxury of organizing it, obviously, in the way that Joanne has been able to, but you could tell that they appreciated, especially as Dave alluded to at the very beginning, these can be very contentious and political situations, and they really appreciated how they have organized this so that it's not all a rush at the end. Any observations, questions, suggestions, open-ended for Joanne or for anything today? Okay,
I have
okay, good. Hi, Kathy.
I liked her comment about also preparing the charter school boards. I forgot that we also made a presentation to the two charters that were up for renewal this year to their boards, to make sure that they understood the criteria and kind of where things stood before it came to our board.
Good suggestion. Those check-ins, one-on-one, answer questions. What do you need to know about the process? How are things looking at this point? Yeah. David.
How about the presenters talking a little bit about how they find themselves in the organizational structure, and how they make sure that they keep their bosses informed, but also get the support, and how they fit into that crazy world of organizational politics and all of that, because each of you have different experiences there. But I think some of our colleagues might benefit from the conversation about both your challenges and the things that you found that have worked for you.
Maybe let's put Joanne on the spot and start, because you've alluded to how you've navigated this and you've been able to do a very thoughtful job. But we'll start with you, and then maybe ask Kathy if she has some, and then Amanda.
Thank you. I think the only thing that I would be able to say to this is stay the course. Is it because there are, yeah, I think I, alluded to this earlier, but there are challenges that come up and things that change, either people that change or situations and contexts that change. It's and it can be very easy in this work, I think, to just shift with political wins. But I think it really forces us all to kind of reflect as leaders to really lead with what do we think is the right thing to do, and and to really just be clear about that, because it's very easy to change based on the situation that you're in. And I would say that when it was really tough for us, when we first had, my team is structured in a slightly different way. Um, is we don't do just charter schools, so we do all things accountability. And our superintendent, shared at CSBA that was a decision, that was made prior to her superintendency, but it's a decision that she thinks like works really well. And there were some things that were really great about it, but then there were things that were really hard about it. And so just really feeling like, if many of us know that we are in this for the right reasons and to do the right work, and to not just be swayed by the context and the politics, because that will always change. And so, just staying on solid footing is kind of, I think, as my reflection of what we've learned in the last few years.
Thanks, Joanne. And I'm going to brag on Kathy a little bit, because when she did her session for her board in a busy board meeting, and she got up to talk about all this very technical academic data and stuff, and received applause at the board meeting. And so for anybody to get applause after talking about the ins and outs of academic performance data, she must have done a good job. So Kathy, on that positive note, tell me about your context within your county office and as to this.
Our office has, probably like yours, has gone through a lot of leadership changes. And there have been times in the last 6 years where I have felt I was just at the mercy of the whims of the people on my team. If they were busy, they might, get this done in a timely manner. But now I'm feeling that the leadership is much more supportive, and it's driven from the top to each of the departments that help support the charter work. And I'm feeling much more supported and cohesive. Because the leadership is new, they've not gone through renewals before. So every step of the way, I communicate with them and go over all the procedures, the ed code, everything.
And I should just add that, every time we get together as CASI, you hear us say, hey, if you have some value to having the CASI show come on the road, let us know. We have done some trainings in county offices that were for the local districts in that county. But in Kathy's case, what she really needed was, she is bringing a lot of different people within her organizational structure into the charter conversation. So it's not just Kathy and her supervisor and everybody will do them a favor, but it's actually kind of, and so part of the context of our being there was to give them sort of a charters 101 that would reach throughout the different staffing and the different roles, so that they could kind of do some catch up as Kathy is able to engage them more. Is that a fair synopsis?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it was so beneficial. And if you find yourself in the kind of the spot that I'm in, you have responsibility with no authority. That it's very helpful for them to hear from the experts, the leaders.
Okay, great. And then Amanda, already shared with us that she's kind of relatively new to this, and in a context that is very busy and intense and under the microscope from everybody in the world. So, Amanda, any more reflections on Dave's question for you?
Yeah, I mean, so I think that, and I have had the pleasure to connect with my colleagues in Oakland Unified, yay, thank you all, and a few other districts, but we're definitely an in the middle ground kind of space here at Sac City, where I have 16 schools, which is a relatively large portfolio, and until very recently, just me. And so what I would say is what I most appreciate of how within that hierarchy is just a sense of reality from my direct supervisor and the superintendent, which is understanding that like we have work to do and that's okay, and we'll do it slowly but surely. And I think that that relationship is really important because in order to stay the course, in order to like feel confident, because at the end of the day, it is me, right? At the end of the day, yes, I am a representative of the superintendent, I'm a representative of the board, but really I'm the one doing the work in the building. I don't think I could do that without having the support of supervisors in our deputy soup and our superintendent who recognize that the system took a long time to fall apart if it was ever there, I don't know. But like recognize that a problem that maybe took 20 years to create isn't going to get fixed in 20 minutes. And I think that like that just really shared sense of reality on the subject is very important. And I know that then they support me when they are talking to the board, when they're talking to other entities about, yeah, it would be really awesome if we had 10 years of oversight records and here's what we're working on. And so I think that that just gives me the space to not feel the weight quite as much, and just like keep going day by day with the work. I think the other piece that I would say is, oh goodness, I maybe just lost my train of thought. Oh,
Okay.
yes. I my my superintendent and deputy soup have supported me in like letting me get the help that I need from outside of our system. I have the pleasure to contract with CCAP for a number of things and with some other entities for support. And they're very supportive of that because they also recognize that it doesn't serve for me to be begging my colleagues in other departments who are also desperately understaffed, like the there just is no more space and no more time to go around. So their support in accessing those resources is huge.
Thank you, Amanda. I don't know, Mifla, I don't know if you, not to put you on the spot, but since you had shared a little bit about what's going on in Santa Clara, did you or any of the other authorizers here want to respond to Dave's?
Dave, can you just repeat your question for me?
Sure. It's the wife of an authorizer, a staff person is an interesting one. How do you in fact make sure that you have that your boss knows what's going on, how you get support, how you operate? How did you find your way in that in the environment you're in? And you can speak to it, from two perspectives, from a prior place as well as you are now. But that's the basic question.
Okay, so I'll start with where I am now. Fortunately, here in Santa Clara County, there is a team of 6 people. We have 1 administrative assistant, 2 financial administrators, a program administrator, an assistant director, and an executive director. So we have a pretty solid team. And so with the 21 charter schools, everyone has kind of their own portfolio of schools that they support. And to keep my superintendent involved, we have a one-on-one meeting at least once a month. Usually it's scheduled for multiple times a month, but we don't always get a chance to keep those meetings. And then I do communicate with her frequently via text message and email about her weekly communique that's going to the board, and things that I'm going to put in there or things I'm thinking about putting in there. For big decisions that we need to make, I will often, make the decision with the team and then run it by her, just to make sure that she's on board with the decision before moving forward. In San Mateo County, I was, like Amanda, the one person doing charter authorizing. However, we only had 1 school. So I I was doing charter authorizing along with 50 other things. And so talked to the superintendent whenever something came up that needed to be talked about, but it wasn't really, to be honest, high on my priority list. And so, yeah, that's my experience.
All right. Would anybody else like to respond? I know we had heard from Madison and Oakland a little about it, but we've got a lot of authorizers on the call. Anybody want to share a little bit about their context and navigating their own particular place in the staffing order of the universe? Going once, going twice. All right. Well, I guess we can give everybody the gift of time. We want to wrap up. But before everybody starts jumping, let me just pick up on something Juan said, which is her emphasis on having the time to reflect back on before you leap to the next thing. And in that spirit, you know that we always beg and plead for feedback from all of you who are on here to help us do a better job every time we convene as CASI. And so stay tuned, because the link to the all-important evaluation is coming. Oh, Allison has just shared it in the chat, but it'll be on a slide as well. So let's move on, and we'll tell you a little bit about some other upcoming events. I think we start with Dave, and then Mifala takes us home.
Please bring up the correct slide. Okay, so join the CASI listserv. If you're not there yet, you should be. Check out the website. There's a lot of information now, and that you actually can get us to respond. We actually will. You give us an email, and we'll talk back to you on what answering whatever your question or making whatever referral we need to. Next slide.
Thanks. So in addition to these quarterly regional quarterly trainings, we also meet monthly on the last Wednesday of the month at 10 o'clock for 1 hour. And our focus is on the latest information, best practices, hot topics. We meet in breakout rooms to share with each other and get support from each other. So networking and information. Next slide, please. And so some next slide. Upcoming events. October 30th is our October Charter Chat. The November Charter Chat has been moved to December because it fell on a holiday, the Thanksgiving holiday. So we're moving it to December 11th. And if you have on your calendar November 27th, I encourage you right now to go and move that meeting to December 11th.
And if you happen to have the meeting invite, it's already been moved for you.
Okay, there you go. All right, next slide. Here's the contact information for the CASI members at SCCOE. And the next slide has contact information for CCAP. And the next slide is a reminder, please, please, please fill out our survey for today. And thank you all for joining us.
And thank you to our guest speakers again.
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you all.